everyone, my name is Josh and this is Cool and Interesting Musings, and today I'm going to give you my second part of my sort of double feature retrospective on the Suspiria films. So part one focused mostly on the Suspiria 1977 film directed by Dario Argento and co-written and directed by Dario Argento and Dario Nicolodi, his then partner. And I said of that film that it is it's a filmmaker's film where you can admire the technique and you can admire the mastery, the use of colour, the use of sound, the use of all these collaborative elements to tell a it's very much driven on the idea of emotions are guiding your reactions to these particular set pieces. The whole entirety of the film is meant to evoke the feeling of a fairy tale and the idea of being trapped in a nightmare, especially when it comes to the murder sequences in the film in regards to the death scenes in the film. It does evoke that sense of being trapped in a nightmare, whether it's seeing something outside your window in the middle of the night, walking alone on your own in the middle of the night, or basically being trapped in a situation that you can't get out of. It's fairly odd and very strange and very dark and very gothic, but then it turns into this very unpleasant crescendo towards the end. And there's even a shot during one of the death scenes where one of the characters, after they get their throats cut, it's like it has this wonderful snap zoom effect where it zooms into her eye, and it's almost like Dario Argento is telling us visually that this is the moment in the nightmare where the sleeper would wake up, the dreamer would wake up. And that's a very nice visual detail. So there's a lot of elements like that that really do give a lot of substance to the film, and that actually turns out to be its greatest strength as a film. But the remake, on the other hand, is a completely different beast. So this film was written by David Kazkanich, and he basically has collaborated with Luca Guadagnino, who's the director, on two other films, A Big Splash and another film that he did several years in between Suspiria, called Bones and All, which is another sort of horror thrillery type film. But Luca Guadagnino is very famous for directing the film Call Me By Your Name, which came out in 2015. And that film, it has a lot of similarities, even though David Kazkanich didn't have any involvement in writing the script for Call Me By Your Name. It does share a lot of similarities with Call Me By Your Name in the sense that it is in itself about awakenings of sorts, because in Call Me By Your Name it basically tells the story of a teenager played by Timothée Chalamet who is just coming to terms with his sexuality, and he falls in love with a man played by Armie Hammer, who sort of comes into his life, and he basically is starting to come to terms with his feelings and what it basically means for him, but then what it will mean from a societal perspective, the societal pressures, how people are going to react when these things happen. But then, of course, it kind of also blossoms and blooms into this very beautiful look into what it means to have a first love, what it means to have a first relationship, and how exciting and how exhilarating it can be. But then, like the coming of the tide, what comes into your life must eventually go out again. And it does share that very, sad and very kind of melancholic vulnerability of what happens when that takes place. Because first loves, even though we like to think they're going to be our soulmates, more often than not, there's a reason why they're our first. They're meant to be not in our lives for long, or they're meant to not stay in our lives forever. That's the whole entire point of that film. Whereas in the case of Suspiria, it focuses more on awakenings, and I'll go into that as we go deeper into the video. But this film follows a very similar beats, but they mostly are recontextualised. I think Luca Guadagnino famously referred to this film as not a straight-up remake or a sort of, reimagining, but sort of like a cover version of the original Suspiria. And it kind of feels almost like that. I kind of had that very same opinion when I was watching it just yesterday, where I felt like this is more of a remix of the original Suspiria rather than an outright, sort of like almost like a reinvention of it almost. It's taking all the elements from the first film, which, let's be perfectly honest, they weren't very well fleshed out, and they really do kind of give them more meat. They give them more of a fleshing out, kind of, and they really do give a much more deeper construct into what's going on. How are these characters connected to each other? They give a lot of historical backdrops, because this film is set in the 1970s. It's set in 1977 during a time where there's a lot of there's a much more bigger political and societal divide between the residents of Germany, the residents of Berlin, after RAF pilots are imprisoned by the local German government, and people are speculating what should they do. Should they basically release these RAF pilots, or should they basically kill them, execute them in a demonstration of power? And for sort of trespassing or whatever. But what's really great about this scene is it does feel, when you first think about it, you think, how does this tie into the overwhelming story with Susie Bannion and everything else? But if you really think about it, it actually really does tie in very nicely. It ties in very nicely to the power structure of the Coven. And right off the bat, you really do learn very quickly that this is a coven of witches, that this dance academy is using its basic dance academy cover as a way of basically showing off their abilities, but not necessarily exposing themselves to the public. They do a very clever thing where they use interpretive dance as a way of kind of highlighting their powerful abilities, their abilities as a coven, what they can do as a collective as well as individually. And what's really great is that this entire film is basically a look at this coven, which is a sisterhood. It's basically like a sisterhood. It's a collective of people who are basically just trying to live their lives whilst also trying to find their mother again, who is the Mother Superiorum. And they believe that the person who's currently running the coven, the Helena Marcos, who's the oldest coven member of the entire group, they believe that she is literally the embodiment of the Mother Superiorum. But Madame Blanc believes otherwise. She believes that, you know, a coven leader should be young and should be, you know, fit and willing to, you know, be tough and very harsh and not, you know, linger and limp along without any, you know, real sense of how long they're going to last. And there's this massive divide. There's even this wonderful scene where the coven members are literally talking about who they want to vote for, and they would always vote for, the majority vote for Helena Marcos, and Madame Blanc is just another member of the academy, essentially, of the coven. And they basically want to use one of the students to use as a much more rejuvenated vessel for the Mother Superiorum, aka Helena Marcos, to slip into, so that she can continue her reign uninterrupted or questioned by a lot of the members of the coven. And I think that really is an interesting way of refleshing out the story. But like I said, they use the interpretive dance of the actual dance academy structure in the students to conduct spells in a very disturbing scene where one of the students decides to basically offend one of the witches, one of the staff members, and basically this leads into a very disturbing sequence where, when Susie is introduced, she's asked to demonstrate her abilities to the class. And before she can continue, Madame Blanc, played by Tilda Swinton, in a sort of three-sided role. There's sort of three roles that she plays throughout the film. One of them is Madame Blanc, and she does this thing where she touches her hands and her feet, and you can see that there's like a little glow in the palm of her hands as she's, you know, as she's touching her, as she's sort of like pressing her thumb into her, you know, palm. And it really is a very weird little detail that does go by in a flash, but it does linger enough for you to really get the idea of this, what's going on. But this is basically all a demonstration of it. It does what the original does, which is to say, you know, it's to really stick in your memory and really make you go, oh, okay, it's this kind of film. This is what we're doing. We're kind of, you know, not going to be we're not going to be messing about. We're just going to be telling you this is how it's going to be happening. And it's a really great way of demonstrating. And I kind of found myself thinking, the original Suspiria doesn't really have any reason why it's set in a dance academy particularly. It just feels like a very interesting place to set a story, I suppose, Dario Argento. But here he actually utilises the mechanics of the dance and how to basically utilise it in a way where it actually can tie in and make perfect sense for these witches to do their thing, but they can also do it in plain sight without people really connecting the dots as to what they're actually doing. So it actually makes you really weary of avant-garde kind of, interpretive dance routines, because you're kind of thinking to yourselves, are these witches now? Like, are they secretly casting a spell on me? But what I really like about it is it's so simple, but yet you could very easily utilize it in a way where you can still blend in as well. And I think that's a very clever way of utilizing that. So the film basically begins in 1977. There's this huge political unrest, and a character by the name of Patricia Hingle, played by Chloe Grace Moretz, comes to a psychologist's office called Yusuf Kemper, and he is a psychologist who's been seeing her for a while, but he seems somewhat surprised by her showing up, because he has another patient on the line, and he basically finds out through Patricia that they're a coven of witches and they have an entire hierarchy. There's the three mothers, Mother Tenenbaum, Mother Nacromarum, and Mother Suspiriorum. They're three, mothers of history lost in time, and they are as follows. Mother Suspiriorum is the mother of signs, Mother Lacrimarum is the mother of darkness, and Mother Tenenbaum is the mother of tears. And all of these characters, to tie back into the original was essentially the first part in a trilogy known as the Three Mothers trilogy, and the subsequent films in that trilogy went Inferno in 1980 and Mother of Tears in 2007. So there's all these different references and details to the original that he is paying homage to. But I really do like the fact that even if he doesn't make a remake of all of those films, he is basically setting up that there's an entire world of these witches and these mothers who are essentially, they have their own power structure, they have their own hierarchy, they have their own way of living their lives, and sort of dealing with the madness of everyday life whilst also conducting their business in there. And I really do like that aspect, and I really do think that's a great way of really establishing world building without going into a little too much detail. But it's a really great film, and I was really actually quite surprised by how well crafted this entire film is. And I love the imagery. I love how all the very scary, surreal imagery does actually tie into some way into something that happens later on in the film. There's a lot of clues and a lot of information given in these very disturbing dream sequences, which Miss Madame Blanc is actually putting into Susie's head. Her and Susie kind of establish a bit of a wonderful mother-daughter relationship, and we find out through her entire backstory that Susie grew up in a very puritanical family, where if she was found going to a movie or to a ballet recital, she would be horrifically punished by being physically punished, as it were, like being hit over the head with a cane, or being burned or scalded by hot iron. And there's a lot of very horrific images like that, but you really do get the sense that she's never really felt entirely allowed to be herself, and you really do get that impression that she's somewhat repressed when she acts and she behaves towards Madame Blanc. She says, "I'm a huge fan of yours, it was an honour to dance with you, and I've studied the routine, I know the steps, I know how everything works." Like, she really does have this almost fangirl quality to how she behaves with the Madame Blanc, and I really do like that fact, because it ties into the fact that she's a little bit of an outsider, she's a little bit of a recluse, she doesn't really get out that much, and she is a little bit strange, and it really gives her a little bit more personality than the way she was in the original, where she just kind of felt like, even though Jessica Harper does a good job with that character, she does feel almost like a blank slate, almost like a surrogate for the audience, where she's meant to be reacting to the stuff in the same way that the audience would. And she's meant to be a surrogate for, the audience, in the sense that she's meant to guide you through these very strange events. Whereas in the case of Susie Bannion, she feels like a much more fleshed out character, and she feels like she has her own story and her own character arc as we go deeper into the narrative. And it's much more of a storyteller's movie, the remake is, because I love story and I love characters. So this film, I was in my element with this film, even though I could appreciate what the original Suspiria was doing from a filmmaking perspective. I found myself kind of going, I love the storytelling here more than anything else, because I really do like the fact that they are, giving more story, they're giving more complexity, and they're giving more real world ideas to this idea. And I really do like the fact that in this film there's a male character called Yusuf Kromper, and he really is a fantastic character because he has an entire story all his own. He's somewhat investigating the events at the Marcus Academy, but then he's also kind of got his own backstory where he was a refugee heading into Berlin with his wife, but the two of them got separated, and he's never really found out what's happened to her ever since. And Yusuf basically has always had that lingering question in his head: what happened to his wife Annika, who later is revealed to be played by Jessica Harper, who was Susie Bannion in the original Suspiria. So I thought that was a very nice little nod to the original. But I really do like this story because it really does show, it really ties into the theme of finding connections and reconnecting with people, and really kind of, you know, even in a world where there's so much conflict and so much unrest, we still struggle for the basic idea of human connection. And it's very weird because I feel like this film could have been a lockdown movie if it was, you know, made in 2020, or if it just happened to be made before 2020 happened. It really kind of gives you that feeling that it ties into the same themes of what we were all looking for in real life in lockdown, where we were looking for connection, we were looking to stay connected with people, we were kind of feeling isolated and alone. And it's kind of very similar in this sense, where all the characters, including Susie Bannion and the witches at the school, they're struggling for power, but then at the same time, they're also trying to find connection and trying to find their home, trying to find their family in this very kind of this great big mess they call life. And there's also the connection that Yusuf is trying to find with his wife, but then he's also trying to help the people who fall under his care and are claiming to see all these horrific things or experience all these horrific things at the academy. So he's also a little bit of a detective almost. But the film is much more slower than the original. It goes from one beat to the next, and you're meant to just sort of roll into it very gradually. But with this one, it likes to take its time. There are horrific sequences throughout. Like I said, the scene where the first kill happens is basically demonstrated through this very aggressive dance sequence that Susie demonstrates to her class with Olga, who's in this room of mirrors. And I really do like that sequence. It's very freaky. There's a lot of contortionist action going on, and there's a lot of body horror elements to it. But what's very disturbing about that sequence is she's still alive when the witches find her and dispose of her. So there's that element that she's not dead. She's not resting in peace. She's literally there as a puppet for the witches to exploit later on in the film. So there's no good or evil to this coven, but they just basically are doing what they do for the sake of getting from point A to point B. So there is that element of... There is that almost, you know, war mentality with the witches as well, which ties into the real-life conflict that's going on around the film, where it's not so much a case of human lives are expendable. It's not so much the case of they're caring for human lives. They're doing this to establish power and establish control within their own universe. And that's why so many people are divided. Like, so many people are kind of saying this real-life story that these people should be let go because they didn't mean to come here, they didn't mean to trespass on our borders, they just basically were here for accidental reasons. But then some people saying that no, if we let them go, it's a sign of weakness, we need to establish power and execute them. So there's that element of harshness, but then it's also the same way with the coven, where they are exploiting these girls, these, you know, students, to basically enact their ritual where they get to find their queen. And it really is a wonderfully divisive idea. And also, quite fittingly, this film was also divisive when it first came out. A lot of critics said it's all style, no substance. A lot of people said there's too much going on to the point where it almost becomes confusing. Or people can say the length is a little bit too long. It's 2 hours long. But it's one of those films where I feel like, even though you have to dedicate a day to actually sit down and watch it in its entirety, it is really worth it. It feels like every single moment. I never found, even when I was rewatching it for this review, I never found while I was watching it, I never found myself looking at the time, checking the time, seeing what time it was or how long we were till the end. I never had that feeling because I was so wrapped up in the emotion of the story and the way the characters were presented in this particular story that I actually found myself really just enjoying this overall structure and how this entire film just basically became a interesting emotional journey, but that it was also a really satisfying story as well, and it pays off in a very grand way, and it really does. So it's one of those things where I feel like the twist of, oh, spoiler alert, by the way, slight spoiler actually. It's actually one of the twists where it's actually one of the main characters who turns out to be the grand reveal, the grand villain, I suppose. It actually feels like that sort of a twist actually feels satisfying here, where it actually feels like they're building it up, and then it pays off beautifully in the end. And I just really love this film. It's a fantastic movie. It's a great examination on not just family and how divisive we can be, but also it's a great examination on awakenings. Like, the whole entire film is about the characters reawakening their potential and, you know, showing what they can do in the best possible way. It's a great, you know, allegory on motherhood. It's a great story about family, finding connections in a very troubling world. It's also about loss and grief and what happens. How can we move on? How can we find closure when there seems so much hopelessness in the world? And even when there is hopelessness, even when the closure isn't the closure that we want, we still find this sense like we feel healed, we feel happier after knowing that information. There's so many great moments like that. And I did say that Tilda Swinton plays 3 roles in this film. She plays Madame Blanc, Helena Marcos in sort of like this very decrepit looking old age makeup, and then she plays Yusuf Kemper. And there's a scene at the end where it's revealed, spoiler alert by the way, again for this film. If you want to go and see this film, please click off this video and go and watch it. It's on Amazon Prime for free, so if you do have Amazon Prime, please go and watch it because it's for free and it's an Amazon Prime exclusive. But yeah, the end of the film basically has this wonderful moment where Yusuf finally finds out what happened to his wife Annika all those years ago when they got separated as refugees into Germany. And I really do think it's a powerful moment. But Tilda Swinton is a fabulous actress in this scene because she really shows that she has a lot of range and she's able to telegraph with her eyes how she has felt, how she feels this great weight. Even though he feels this overwhelming sadness, Yusuf, the character, feels this overwhelming sadness that his wife has basically just died, and she died in a really horrible way. He still feels relief because he finally knows that she died, that he has some closure, even though it's the closure that he didn't want. He wanted to hold on to the idea that she was alive. But what was very satisfying is that he got that closure in the end. He got that closure, so now he can rest easy, and the Mother Superiorum actually does throw him a little bit of a bone, and she says, we need pain, and we need sorrow, and we need guilt, and we need shame, but we don't need yours. You're fine. You've suffered enough. We don't need your pain. We don't need your shame. We don't need your guilt. We need someone else's. And that's how we need to survive. We need to use guilt. We need to use pain. We need to use suffering in order to, you know, lift ourselves up in a way. Like, it kind of feels like an interesting commentary on sort of our lives as well. Like, we need other drama from other places to kind of keep us interesting. It's kind of like how we look at television. Like, we love our reality TV shows. We love watching other people kind of go through these turmoils for our entertainment. So we are kind of like, I know it's going to sound very cheesy, but we are kind of like a coven of witches, aren't we? Like, we are kind of feasting on other people's suffering whilst we get satisfaction from it. It kind of feels like a very, I don't know, it feels like something to think about. But yeah, I really love this film. It's a film that, again, like I said, it was one of my favourites of 2018, and I feel like it's a good film, and I feel like, let me know what you thought of this film in the comments, because I'd really love to hear you guys' thoughts on this film. What did you think about it? Did you think it was good? Didn't you think it was good as the original? Why didn't you think it was as good as the original? Why did you think the original was better? Or why did you think the remake was better than the original? Let me know your thoughts. Whatever your thoughts are, let me know in the comments below. And if you really like this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. Let me know how you felt about it. And that's all for today, and I've been Joshua, Whimsical and Interesting Musings. I hope you're all having a very good day, and I hope you're all doing very well. Take care, bye-bye for now.